All right, Mike Heck here for MMAfighting.com. And just like weather in New England, my friends, in the world of the Ultimate Fighting Championship, just wait a minute and the whole divisional landscape can change in an instant. And that is what had happened in the UFC heavyweight division. So if you missed it, we have a new main event for UFC 265 on August 7th. There is a heavyweight championship on the line, but not the undisputed heavyweight title. And it will not include Francis Ngannou. There will be an interim heavyweight championship fight 3 months after Ngannou becomes champion after knocking out Stipe Miocic. An interim title will be up for grabs as Derrick Lewis will fight Ciryl Gane in Houston, Texas. Gane, of course, just defeated Alexander Volkov in the UFC Vegas 30 main event this past Saturday. And people were wondering where Ciryl Gane is going to go in this logjam heavyweight title picture. Well, we have our answer. He's going to Houston to fight Derrick Lewis. And let me just say, if you said, hey, Mike, write me a list of 1,000 fights that could get announced today, this one is absolutely not making the list. It's just not. But here we are. And it's funny because Ariel Helwani and I were talking about Gane's win and where he could go on What the Heck. And it seemed as if Ngannou versus Derrick Lewis might happen in September. I know Dana White had been talking about it for weeks and weeks now. And then like 10 minutes after the interview with Ariel ended, we get this news. So it's almost like not a waste of a conversation, but just something we just have to keep in mind when that thing drops on Tuesday morning. But all this is happening. We got a statement from Francis Ngannou's agent, Markel Martin, who said, quote, "This comes as a complete shock. To make an interim title so soon, if you look at the history of this division, it comes as a surprise. We hope to get clarity and figure out something with the UFC soon." And of course, Francis Ngannou was not going to go quietly into that good night. He reacted to this news as well on Twitter by saying, "I remember my interim title fight against Jairzinho. Oh, wait." And then followed up by saying nothing is right about this situation in essence when replying to MMA journalist Ariel Helwani's tweet. So, wow. Let us react to what we just found out moments ago, shall we? We have MMA Fighting's own Shaun Al-Shatti and Jose Youngs joining us. Shaun, let us begin with you. What gives, man? Where the hell did this come from?
I mean, you're not the only one asking that on this Monday morning, right? This seems to be a shock to everybody, including Francis Ngannou. Man, this is the most UFC thing possible, right? Like we had in front of us, it was gifted to the UFC. Jon Jones, Francis Ngannou, the guy you've waited for how long? How long have we been talking about Jon Jones going to heavyweight? And pretty much the entirety of his light heavyweight run. We've always had that question out there. It was the biggest fight by a country mile. That could have been, it still might be, one of the biggest fights of all time. I firmly believe that would have been the biggest non-Conor McGregor fight that the UFC could ever book. Jon Jones, Francis Ngannou, riding off the heat of what Francis Ngannou did to Stipe Miocic and just appearing to be this insurmountable champion. And instead of Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou, we end up with this fight right here. That is a perfectly fine fight, but it's not a fight that any of us ever expected. Derrick Lewis, Ciryl Gane, no one was asking for this, and it's all because of the UFC just needs to fill a spot on the schedule, and they're getting a little frustrated and flustered with what this whole Francis Ngannou situation is. It is the most UFC move imaginable. It is, frankly, in my opinion, ridiculous. I mean, nobody wants this or is asking for this. You're in a position right now with this heavyweight division where you have this champion who could be this superstar, and you're booking an interim title fight 3 months after he captures his title. We used to go whole years with one title fight in this division. Now all of a sudden there's this huge urgent push to do this sort of thing, and it's all because Francis couldn't make some sort of date that you felt like he had to make. It's ridiculous. It's the most UFC thing imaginable, but that doesn't excuse it. To me, the fact that we didn't end up with Jon Jones, Francis Ngannou is bad enough, but the fact that now we're already in an interim title fight for a division that just settled this sort of thing, it makes no sense to me.
Jose, you have infamously said for well over a year now that no fight is official until both guys make the walk and actually get in the cage and fight. And I know this is a little bit of a different context than some of the other scenarios that you have laid out over the last several months, but an interim title fight, this is crazy, man. Like, how did you react to this? Like, I had no idea this was coming. This is a shock.
What else do I always say, Mike? What has been one of my other go-to phrases? If you ask for something, UFC ain't going to give it to you in any aspect. Any sort of fantasy matchmaking you do, there's a 99% chance that none of those fights are going to happen. And that's exactly what happened right here. I do like what Shaun said, and I actually 100% agree. It's a timing thing. Like they didn't have a headliner for that card in August in Houston. Right now, it's Amanda Nunes versus Juliana Pena, and I think it was on either What the Heck or Between the Links or one of the shows that we're on. Someone said it just didn't have the punch that a pay-per-view needed. Maybe it was missing one aspect, and you're trying to figure out what else could go on it. We all assumed it was going to be Francis and Derrick Lewis, but then as soon as they said it's probably not going to happen in August, we just assumed it would happen in September. Maybe they wanted Derrick Lewis to fight in his hometown of Houston, and Ciryl Gane just fought, so doesn't excuse it. I don't hate the fight in terms of an actual fist fight because it's two high-level heavyweights fighting each other. But Derrick Lewis should be fighting Francis because that's what Dana White said. Everyone's like, oh, Dana White has said this is happening. It's probably going to happen. And it's not happening. So I'm not surprised because, as Shaun has said, it's just the most UFC thing possible because we all wanted Francis versus John Jones, which means we weren't going to get it. And then we all wanted Francis versus Derrick Lewis, which obviously means we're not going to get it. So next man up, Derrick Lewis, Ciryl Gane. It's very bizarre. It's very baffling, but it's just the UFC being the UFC.
Let me cut back in because you even just said right there, Jose, that we all like the fight that we all were expecting was Francis versus Lewis, and that's the fight that should be happening. And it's like that was even a backup fight. That itself was a backup fight to a huge fight, and now we have a backup to a backup. The fact that we can't even let Francis Ngannou get 3 months, 4 months after winning this title, that he literally waited years and years to get this title shot, and now we need him back in action in 3 or 4 months. Otherwise, something like this, I mean, come on, guys. What are you doing? What you take away from Francis Ngannou when you do this sort of thing? You have a guy on the precipice of absolute stardom, and you're going to introduce a second champion in his division because he wasn't able to go like a couple months later after he won this title? Like, what? How does this make any sense other than the idea that we have just, I guess, settled into and is just a reality now in today's UFC of, hey, there is this spot on this schedule, and one way or another, we're going to get a title fight on this spot. And if you're not ready, it doesn't matter. The train moves on without you, even if you're potentially the biggest star that we have right now, not named Conor McGregor. So the whole thing again is just so UFC, man. Like, how did we end up with this fight? How did we end up with this fight? How is this the one that we got when we started from such a great place where it's like, this is the layup. This is the layup of all layups to do John Jones, Francis Ngannou. You've been waiting for a decade for John Jones to actually commit to heavyweight, and he did it. He gained all the weight. It's right there. It's just in front of you. Just pay the man. Pay both of them. And this is what we end up.
It's something. It's similar to remember when Anthony Pettis fought Max Holloway for the interim featherweight title, like 6 pay-per-views after Jose Aldo won the title and Conor vacated. It's the same thing. They just wanted big names at the top of the card. No one asked for this interim title. No one asked for this fight. It's just the UFC goes, hey, we're out of champions. Let's create an interim one just to stick at the top of this card. So if they had waited a month, Francis could probably fight in September. But like Shaun said, they want something big on this specific time on this specific day in Houston. It's nothing new. It's just the UFC being the UFC. Again, I like it as a fight, but I don't think it needs an interim title on it. I don't think this needs an interim title on it.
But put yourself in Francis Ngannou's shoes right now.
No, I 100% agree. Yeah.
Because if you're Francis Ngannou, how are you feeling right now on this Monday morning? Like you were essentially the number one contender from February 2019 up until March of this year, and you couldn't convince them to book an interim title fight. You were kind of stuck waiting behind this logjam that was created with DC and Stipe, and you were out there essentially being the champion, just defending against these number one contenders, whether it was Rosenstruck or JDS or Kane or anybody, Curtis Blades, and you couldn't get them to create an interim belt for you. And now after 3 months, just 3 months into your reign, there's already one because you weren't able to make the state. If you're Francis Ngannou, you have to be livid right now. It's just like, how are these guys getting it and I couldn't get it for 2 years?
Shaun, let me ask you this. You and I have not worked together that long. So you may not know this about me, but I try to be a silver lining guy. I try to find the sunshine in an otherwise cloudy day, Mr. Al-Shatti. Is there a chance that the UFC is doing Derrick Lewis a solid here? They're giving him a nice bump in pay, giving him a main event fight at home for an interim title against Gane. But behind the scenes, maybe, just maybe, Jon Jones and the UFC have made nice. Maybe a deal is in place to get Jones this big fight with Ngannou. And we know the UFC and they like to get one piece done first before moving on to the other. So maybe Ngannou doesn't even know this is happening. And then that this fight between Lewis and Gane will essentially be a number one contender fight. The winner will fight the winner of Jones versus Ngannou. And we're just adding a little sizzle to the steak to make Derrick happy, make Gane happy. Is that at all possible? Is the chance above 1% that this is a possibility?
Was Ciryl Gane not happy? Like, he just fought 2 days ago.
Not Ciryl. I'm talking about Derrick. I mean, Derrick
I understand.
Basically said he's in the fight, but now you're like, Derrick, guess what, dude? John's in, you're out. What can we do to make it better for you? All right, we'll let you headline this card in August.
I don't know that the UFC is super worried about how Derrick Lewis is feeling, if we're being honest with each other, right? Like, I don't know that they're feeling like they need to placate Derrick Lewis. Sure, is there a chance that we might still get Jon Jones versus Ngannou out of this? I mean, there's a chance of anything, apparently. We just got Derrick Lewis versus Ciryl Gane for the interim title. So there's a chance of anything, but I wouldn't put my money on it, because if that fight is there and it's ready, why not just book that whenever you can book that and then just do something else for this card, right? Because you're diminishing the heavyweight title and everything to do with the heavyweight division when you introduce an interim belt. That's just how it works with the public, right? Like, if the public sees a second belt in this division, the first belt isn't maybe as important as it should be. Is there a chance of that? Sure, but I wouldn't bet on it. Like, if I had to bet money right now, I wouldn't put money on it.
Here's what happens every time the UFC does, and I say this has happened. It happens all the time. The UFC puts 3 titles on one card, like they did in Jacksonville. They use so many champions in like a real short amount of time. They're like, we don't have a champion for an event. Either we're going to cancel it, like they did that one, and they were supposed to have that January one in Anaheim, and Kamaru Usman and Ben Askren volunteered to fight Colby Covington, and then Colby said no, so they just canceled it. Well, and then it happens. They, with the Holloway Pettis one, they had like that Madison Square Garden card with like 3 a bunch of fights or whatever, and then all of a sudden they run out of champions. So again, they wanted something for this specific day, and it's bizarre. If it means we can get Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones, I'm fine with it. But as of right now, we don't know. But very bizarre.
Should this fight be the main event, Sean, over an undisputed title fight between Amanda Nunes and Juliana Pena? Like, I understand that maybe this card needed a second punch to the 1-2, but you could still make that the co-main event, and it's literally the exact same thing. The marquee doesn't have to change. You just put all 4 faces on the poster. It's not a big deal. Is this a disservice to those 2 ladies, more specifically Amanda Nunes, with the run she has had over the last few years? And on top of that, being the greatest women's fighter of all time, should she be getting the rub here and not an interim title fight?
I mean, that's a tough question. I don't really concern myself too often with the idea of the card placement and where people go and that sort of thing. I mean, that's all seems very arbitrary, and ultimately, unless you're getting pay-per-view points, it doesn't really matter much. I would say Amanda Nunes probably would be cool with these dudes headlining the event. It's less work for her, and it's less pressure on her shoulders to do that. I'm sure that's going to be what the UFC ends up doing too, just because it is a heavyweight fight. But I mean, when it comes to the actual logistics of it, I would be fine with whatever they end up doing. I don't know that that's that big of a deal.
Jose, I know you're not huge into the betting odds, but it's sometimes nice to put things into context. Right now, Ciryl Gane, a -325 favorite against Derrick Lewis to come back at +275. Agree or disagree?
I guess I wouldn't put it that. I'd probably put it closer, but I do agree that I would probably favor Ciryl Gane to win this fight, just based on what he's shown in his past 2 performances. And we've seen like Derrick Lewis was very close to losing to Volkov before but has that touch of death. So Derrick Lewis is never out of a fight, but just based off of their last 2 performances, I don't think we've ever seen Ciryl Gane in trouble ever. He's one of 3 fighters in the UFC to never fight off of his backs, and not that Derrick Lewis is going to take him down. But yeah, I would favor Ciryl, but I would probably make that gap a little smaller.
If Ciryl Gane wins this fight, Sean, and they can't, let's hope the path is to Jon Jones. We hope that happens. It may, but is it not? Is this a backup plan though? Is this maybe a backup? Like if Ciryl Gane wins this fight, you could do Ngannou versus Gane. in France or, I mean, that's massive. That's a massive thing. Is this, maybe it's not like a reward for Derrick Lewis and doing a thanks for the favor, bro, but maybe maybe it's just like a plan B for Francis Ngannou. Like, hey man, we either give you Jones or you fight Gane in France next year.
I mean, sure, we're assuming that Ciryl Gane's going to win this fight. I probably favor him too, but that's a lot of assumptions still, right? Derrick Lewis, you give him 25 minutes to land a shot, like he might land that shot. We've seen it 1,000 times. To me, what this does though is it essentially you're kicking the can even farther down the road for Jon Jones. Like that can't even really be a possibility anymore once you have an interim champion, right? Like at that point, Francis has to fight the interim champion unless we're going to do the Colby Covington, Tony Ferguson thing where we're just going to strip an interim because we found something more fun and bigger to do. Like at this point, you're basically forcing the issue that this Jon Jones super fight that the entire world wants to see and will make you so much money can't happen logistically until next year, maybe even farther along the line than that. Like you're just making that an absolute certainty when you book this kind of fight with an interim title not too far away. I mean, this is 2 months away. This is all the UFC doing the UFC, man.
I'm just trying to find any kind of angle to have this make sense, and none of them are working.
Like,
not one.
Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones inside Madison Square Garden was, as Sean, not even a layup. Like we're gonna lower the basket to like waist high, and you're just gonna like put it in. Like that was the fight to make. Francis versus Jon, the heavyweight championship of the world, against the man who can just take your soul with his fist, against the greatest fighter of all time, like the heavyweight championship of the world in Madison Square Garden. All the history, all the heavyweight titles in boxing that have been there. That was the fight, and now that's not going to like that can't happen for another year because of the timing of this.
Last thing on this, true or false, Sean? The biggest loser in this whole situation is Stipe Miocic.
False. I mean, the biggest loser in all of this is either Francis, Jon Jones, or all of us for missing out on a fight that would have been one of the biggest fights in the history of the sport. Like the historical ramifications that would have been in place for Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou are immense, right? Like you could spend 20 minutes listing how the effects that could have on each guy's legacy and just how we consider them and sort of their overall, where they sit in the pantheon, especially a guy like Jon. Like that would probably make him the GOAT. Like unquestionably, even if, I mean, obviously the PED stuff is that still out there, but just aside from that, like the ultimate loser of all of this is probably Jon Jones. Like he did it. He did the work. He's a heavyweight right now. Like he put in the time finally. And now he's 1 or 2 steps behind even getting a title shot. Like in the ultimate loser, that's Jon Jones.
Okay. To be more clear, Jose, in the actual title picture right now, because Jon, we knew there was going to be hurdles getting to this fight. So having an interim at this point is a shocker. Not having Jon Jones involved is not really a shocker. But how much does this hurt Stipe right now? Because he was ahead of Ciryl Gane in this conversation, and now he's like completely out of it.
Yeah, remember, I forgot to bring this up. Like, remember the winner of Derrick Lewis and Francis was supposed to fight Stipe, or Dana White was like, hey, maybe Stipe fights Jon. And Jon was like, yeah, that's not happening. So Stipe is just the forgotten man in this. I'm not saying he's the biggest loser, but Stipe did just get knocked unconscious like very recently. So if he wants more time to be a firefighter and be a dad, and as he said, he wants to put on a lot more weight before he, in his mind, was going to have that rubber match against Francis. If he's holding out for that rubber match, it's going to be a long time before we see Stipe. But again, like Sean said, I don't think he's the biggest loser. But if you're a big Stipe fan, not Jed Meshew, obviously, it's going to be a while before you see him back in there.
Yeah, it's now even longer of a road to get back to a title shot, no matter who wins. Even if Francis isn't the champion, he's got a long road back to that title. So a lot to unpack here. This is actually happening. We're not dreaming. We're actually talking about this. The interim heavyweight title will be up for grabs on August 7th in Houston at UFC 265. Derrick Lewis versus Ciryl Gane.
Let's even hope that fight happens. Remember, Chaz Skelly was supposed to fight, and he made the walk to the octagon, and his fight didn't happen. So let's just fingers crossed everyone can actually make that fight.
We're gonna end up with Augusto Sakai fighting for the interim title or something. This is ridiculous.
Augusto Sakai versus Marcin Tybura for the interim heavyweight title, August 7th. Make the poster, damn it. Make the poster. All right, we have talked about this enough. I'm sure we'll be talking about it a lot more on the way to August 7th, but Until then, for Jose, Shaun Al-Shatti, I am Mike Heck. We'll see you later.